very much. Welcome this afternoon to the City of York Council's Gambling, Licensing and Regulatory Committee. My name is Councillor Helen Douglas and I'm the chair of this meeting today. Declarations of interest. Any councillors have any declarations of interest they'd like to table at this time? No? Fabulous. Nobody has registered to speak under the public participation. You're all going to be speaking to the actual application itself, so that'll be your opportunity. Oh, that's all right. What do I need to say? Okay. There are some pink papers in this pack, and should any questions or any discussion come from these papers, we will be asking the press and public and press even, to remove themselves from the meeting because those items are restricted. Okay? So, item number 4 is minutes of the previous meeting. Have we all had a look at the minutes and happy to sign them as correct? Sorry, Councillor Crisp.
On declarations of interest, the last two lines, taxi licence, Councillor Gillis declared personal interest in agenda items 4, and it says at the end, 5, taxi licensing, equalities as his daughter and son-in-law were licensed drivers, including her, but they are licensed drivers, not were.
Okay. Is that right? All right, thank you very much. Anybody else? No? Okay. Just sign them there. Okay, so we're on to item 5, which is the main purpose of this meeting today. What's going to happen is we're going to hear from Neil Ferris first, and then from Leslie Cook, and then from all of the people who've registered to speak here this afternoon. As each of you has spoken, the members will be given an opportunity to ask you some questions if they choose to do so. When we've got through to the end of that, members will then have a chance to ask any further questions of the officers here today that are helping them. We won't be having any debate at the point. That will be questions and questions only. Once all the questioning's been done and everybody's spoken, then we will go into debating. Okay? Right.
Thank you, Chair. So, my name's Neil Ferris. I'm the Corporate Director of Economy and Place, and taxi licensing falls under my responsibilities. So I just want to outline for the committee and for everybody within the room what this decision is and is not about. So in respect of what this decision is not about, it is not about the validity of the Uber platform. It's not about the arguments for or against drivers out of town operating within the city. It is not about decisions made by other councils. It is not about the requirements of the council's licensing arrangements in respect of safeguarding. What the decision before you tonight is about, and it's solely about, is does this committee consider the operator fit and proper to hold a licence, and on the balance of probability based on the information before you. If members do not consider the operator fit and proper, or consider a shorter licence period than the usual 5-year period is appropriate, then the committee needs to be explicit as to the reasonable and specific grounds as to why they have come to that conclusion. And that is effectively the essence of tonight's meeting and the decision before you. I'll now pass on to Leslie Cook, the licensing officer, to talk through the report in front of you.
How the meeting was structured last time was the decision was made in private. Will it be made in private tonight?
No. No.
The decision was made in public. At the last occasion, the members wished to consider commercial information that the operator was only able to divulge in private. Members retired, effectively excluding the press and the public from the meeting to consider that commercial information, and then the meeting was reconvened in public for the decision to be made.
Okay, can we leave the questions until after everybody's spoken? Thank you. We'll just leave the questions until everybody's spoken. Thank you.
The application before you today is the renewal of a private hire operator's licence for Uber Britannia Limited. Their York operators base is located at Tower Court, Oakdale Drive, Clifton Moor in York, and the application can be found at Annex 1 of the report. The application has been made under Section 55 of Part 2 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. The relevant legislation provisions and legal context relating to private hire operator licences can be found at Annex 2. The licence should be granted for a period of 5 years unless there are specific reasons in a particular circumstance in the case to justify granting the licence for a lesser period. The application for the renewal of the licence Section 62 of the 1976 Act supplies and provides the only grounds on which an application can be refused, and these are detailed in paragraph 8 of the report. In the event that the application is refused, there is a right of appeal to this decision to the Magistrates' Court. On the 25th of April 2016, this committee agreed standard conditions which should be placed on a licence if granted, and they can be found at Annex 3. There is no legal requirement within the 1976 Act to consult on applications of this nature. Uber Britannia Limited operator's licence with this authority expires on the 23rd of December 2017. There is a slight error in one of the paragraphs of the report. Their private hire history with York can be found on pages 9 and 10 of the report. Details of complaints received since Uber Britannia started operating in York relating to Hackney and private hire licence trade can be found at paragraphs 23 and Annex 4 of the report. Just to give members a brief update, I did another report today on our complaints up to today, and we've now had 314 complaints regarding Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and drivers, and 163 of these relate to complaints regarding Uber. To aid members, details of licensing authorities that if issued Uber Britannia Limited a private hire operator's licence can be found within Annex 1. The terms and conditions operated by Uber taken from their website can be found at Annex 5. Now, the Annex 5 was missed out of the report when it was published. It is now published correctly on the website, and there are copies of Annex 5 on the tables in front of everybody. Members will be aware that on the 22nd of September this year, Transport for London refused to renew Uber London Limited private hire operator licence on the grounds that they are not a fit and proper person. Uber London Limited is a separate company and is not the applicant in the case that we are dealing with today. Members will also be aware from the applicant's submissions that on the 8th of March, a licensing subcommittee at Reading Borough Council refused to grant Uber Britannia a private hire operator's licence. That decision was specific to the facts of that particular case. As it's recently been in the news, members will be aware that Uber have recently disclosed that they were subject to a data breach in late 2016. Uber contacted the council following this breach, advising of the steps they are taking. The committee has the following options when making your decision. Option 1, grant the renewal of licence with standard licence conditions attached for a period of 5 years. Option 2, grant the licence with the standard conditions attached and/or other conditions which are considered appropriate for a lesser period imposed by this committee. Option 3, refuse the application. Option 3, refuse the application if satisfied having regard to the facts set out in the application of this report and on the grounds set out in section 62. That's a brief outline of the report.
Thank you very much. So now we move to the people who've registered to speak tonight. The first one is Councillor Rawlings. If you'd like to take a seat there, when it's your turn, if you'd like to take a seat there too. Each of you will have 3 minutes, and when we get to 2.5 minutes, I'll ask you to sum up what you have to say. And after each speaker, again, I'm just going to remind you all that you can then ask those questions of that speaker at that time. Further questions to Leslie and Neil will be at the end of that section. And then we will go into debate. So please, just questions for now. Councillor Rawlings, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I came along this evening because I was one of the members of the committee who made the decision in December last year to issue a one-year licence to Uber. And although the papers do give you some background in there, I thought it was appropriate that I came along and just talked through that meeting with you tonight so you had that knowledge base. I believe Councillor Looker, if I recall, was on that committee with me at that time. Chair, firstly, it came to a staff in an urgency meeting because of the late application. That's why it didn't come to this committee at that time. And the application was submitted late, so that was the only way it could be heard before the licence ran out. The committee was extremely concerned at that late application and also concerned that although the licence had been issued previously for a year, Uber had only been operating in York for 4 months at the time that we renewed it. There were some private sessions took place for confidential information, as discussed earlier, but they were not. But the decision was made in public, and therefore, on that point, Councillor Mason is somewhat wrong. Chair, we were concerned during that meeting that there were a large number of complaints that had been raised to Uber, and with a 4-month period, it had been very difficult for officers to bring those through to a conclusion and give us an informed position, and therefore we took the approach that only 1 year was appropriate. I have to express some concerns with regards to the papers this evening, because once again I see that although there is more detail, I hope you'll be drilling down on the complaints that have been made against them and quantifying that in relation to the number of Uber cars in the area compared to York taxi firms in order to put them into context. As I see it, we're in a very similar position. Unless officers can give more detail around the complaints that have been made, I question whether we have moved on in the last year. Personally, although it's only anecdotal comments, I have had some personal concerns with regards seeing Uber vehicles in the York area. These relate to traffic issues and wrong turns and making illegal turns in York, and parking in car parks awaiting fares and taking up parking spaces which should be available for residents. I appreciate those comments are very anecdotal and may well not be able to be taken in as a substantive comments in your decision making, but I would ask that you reflect on the decision that was made last time and think carefully about the detail in the report on the complaints and how they have been handled. Thank you.
You have 30 seconds left, but that's fine. That's it.
Chair, I'm happy to take any questions
Yeah.
for anybody who wasn't on that committee.
Does any member have any question they'd like to put to Councillor Rawlings based on what he's just said? No?
Very easy. Thank you for putting
Thank you.
off first as well, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So then the second speaker is Safdin. If you'd like to take a seat. So you have 3 minutes, and when you have 30 seconds remaining, I'll ask you to sum up, and then I'll invite members to ask you any questions at that point. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Are we on? Okay. Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Safdin. I'm the chairman for York Hackney Carriage Association. I'm sure some of you may have heard of me. I'm sure you're in no doubt about why you should not renew the Uber licence for York. Many of my colleagues today will outline various readings and reference information before you today. Whilst York only has a handful of drivers licensed, Uber are doing exactly what they are very, very good at, and that is systematically abusing the local laws and explicitly looking for loopholes by the use of out-of-town vehicles of many who have no knowledge of our city, lack of respect for our roads, illegally applying for hire on taxi ranks and breaking our traffic laws repeatedly. Furthermore, and against the current cross-border law, they sit on double yellow lines and wait excessively for a would-be customer. We have evidence for many of these occasions and video evidence too, with regards to the illegal take for fares in our city. Overall, staying in the name of all taxi trade in York that has enjoyed an excellent reputation thus far, prior to any licence being considered, you should ask them the following question. Who is the actual contract with when a customer makes a booking? Is it actually with the company Uber, or is it actually with the driver? Because as a current Hackney carriage driver, when I'm hailed, my contract is directly with the customer. Whereas with Uber, they're unable to quantify that, as recently demonstrated by 9 other authorities. Uber made an application for licence, including Hull. And when these authorities asked them the very same question that I pose here, Uber withdrew their application for licence because they were unable to clarify who the actual contract is with. And I'm happy to clarify that later if you wish. The trade does not object to fair competition. However, Uber are not a fair player in the public transport world in UK. Should the committee not be fully satisfied and have any doubts, then I cannot see how the licence can be renewed for any period. Therefore, I urge you to be the most proactive members by refusing the application today and offer no licence until you are fully satisfied. Now, I do have a petition to hand over, and petition is for safeguarding of passengers, which reads, we, the undersigned, would like to support the motion for City of York Council to restrict out-of-town vehicles working in our city.
You have 30 seconds, Mr.
Thank you. And do not want Uber licence to be renewed. Uber are a danger to vulnerable members of the public. They seek to take advantage by applying for hire without bookings, charge excessive surcharges, and have individuals working for them whom have no knowledge of our city. We would like all drivers who work in York to be registered with the local private hire company or be a hackney carriage driver. We do
Time's
not
up,
want
Mr.
Uber
Dinn.
in
Thank you
York.
very much. If you'd like to, can you take the petition? What's supposed to do with the petition? Okay.
1353.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Dinn? Councillor Wells?
Hello. Can you just clarify that matter, the issue about hiring and whether the contract's with the driver or Uber or the company?
Yeah, it's a question that was recently asked at the point of the application was submitted. Who is the actual contract with? For example, I'm a hackney carriage driver, so you as a customer, if you, member of the public, woke up to a hackney carriage rank, your contract is directly with me to provide that once I've taken that journey from A to B, or from here to London or etc. Whereas with an Uber, they're unable to quantify who the contract is with. Is the contract actually with Uber UK, Uber Britannia, or Uber at Clifton Moor? Or is the contract with the driver who has travelled all the way from London to work in our city as a transport for London? So they're unable to do that. Who is the contract with? And on many occasions, we have drivers actually just sitting in the street, just picking up a customer without a booking. So who would be liable if anything went wrong? Uber or TfL or the driver?
Councillor Wells, can I suggest that you ask Neil, the Uber head of Cities North of England Support, Neil McGonigal, sorry, I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, when he comes, because he will be the best person to ask that question, since it's his licence that he's applying for. Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. Lee Ward. Do we have Lee Ward? Is he today? Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ward, you have 3 minutes, and when 2.5 minutes is gone, I'll ask you to sum up, and then everybody will get the chance to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Today's meeting is to decide if Uber, the company, are fit and proper to hold an operator's licence in York. I'm sure that they will tell you about the legal fight with TfL, but that's nothing to do with York. You are here today to decide on the fit and proper status of Uber, the company, in York for its residents, visitors and students, which you are responsible for the safety of. Uber is a trading name which involves several entities, but all work together: Uber Britannia, Uber London and Uber BV, the tax-avoiding arm base of the Netherlands. In the report, it states that Uber London are not part of this application. I beg to differ. It's all the same company. Also the same app is across the country. Are Uber fit and proper? They have been refused licences in Reading, North Tyneside and Cardiff. They have been suspended in Sheffield and not renewed in London. They have walked away from their applications in Crawley, Conway, Gateshead, Harrogate, Oxford, Preston, Wokingham, Sandwell and Worcester, and that's only to my knowledge. Why? Because the question has been asked, who accepts the booking, the driver or Uber? In 2 legal cases, the answer has been that Uber accept the booking after the driver has. That's backfilling and illegal. Almost simultaneously does not mean before. This is the same as Section 19 of York's Operators' Conditions. A driver cannot be involved in the acceptance of a booking. I'm sure that Uber's sales team, because that's what they are, will try to choose their words to make you think otherwise. The fact is that twice they have stated in a court of law that the booking is accepted by the driver, once in Canada and another in the UK tribunal regarding workers' rights. If Uber are so fit and proper, why are we sat here today? This company has so many lawsuits, it's beyond belief. It's also admitted to it being hacked and did nothing about it. To this day, Uber Britannia is not even registered on the ICO database for data protection. They simply don't care. Ask yourselves this: why so many court cases in so many countries? What makes them fit and proper here, but not anywhere else? They will tell you about the amount of customers that have downloaded their app. They will tell you about the amount of customers that use the system. They won't tell you if it's legal or not. They may tell you about the investment in electric vehicles. They won't tell you it's the drivers and customers who are paying for them. They won't talk about the Indian lady who was raped and they got the medical records to fight her back with. They won't tell you about being hacked and keeping it quiet while they paid off the hackers. They won't tell you about all the sexism within the company. What they will tell you is carefully selected words with half-truths in them.
30 seconds, Mr.
They
Ward.
will also tell you what you think you want to hear. It's up to you to hear what they are saying. So ask them to prove if the booking platform is legal and it's not the driver who accepts the booking. Please, ask them. They usually just walk away and make the decision for you. Remember their company motto: it's easier to ask forgiveness than it is permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, members, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Ward? No? Okay. Thank you very much. So the next on the list is Wendy Loveday. Wendy, there you are.
Hi.
So you have 3 minutes, and at 2.5 minutes I'll ask you to sum up. Okay, and then we'll ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have some important numbers for you. 57 million, 13 and 72. 57 million is the number of Uber accounts that were hacked. 13 is the number of months that it took Uber to finally admit that they had not only been hacked, but that also paid a ransom to the hackers. Those 13 months consist of 9,360 hours. They should have reported the breach of their security within 72 hours, meaning that they sat on this information for 9,288 hours longer than is legally allowed. Passenger safety has always been a major issue for us where Uber are concerned, but now it's not just their physical safety, it's their online safety that's at risk. York Council need to show Uber that they care about the safety of their citizens and visitors, even if Uber choose to disregard it completely. This breach of security had already occurred at the point that York Council renewed Uber's licence last year. You granted them a licence in good faith, based on the information that you had then, which did not include this massive cover-up. Don't make the same mistake again, only to find out 13 months further down the line about something else that's going on right now that you don't know about. Don't wait to see what little gem they have in store for you. Just say no to the licence. If somebody asks the right questions, they will just walk away. Let me remind councillors that the LGA handbook states that you only have to have soft intelligence to refuse a licence. You only have to believe that they are not fit and proper. You do not have to prove this. I quote from this year's Uber relicensing application that it was noted last year that if a licence was not granted, Uber could still operate in York using out-of-town drivers, which would mean even less control over who was operating in the city. Well, they've totally proven that they cannot recruit York drivers, so we have continued to encourage out-of-town drivers to come and work in York, running roughshod over our city, not caring about the consequences, and this is absolutely no reason whatsoever to relicense them. Uber have deliberately deceived the world, and they will continue to do so. Do not be a party to this deception. You are our council. So members, please remember these three numbers: 57 million accounts hacked, 13 months before Uber owned up to paying a ransom, breaking the law and keeping it quiet, and only 3 minutes for me to convince you not to give them a licence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You still had 15 seconds, but that's fine.
Oh, thank
I
you.
I noticed that you were winding up anyway, so that's fair.
Yeah.
Does any member have any questions, pardon me, for Wendy Loveday? Councillor Mason.
In terms of the 72 hours, where does that come from, do you know?
It's in the legislation that if you have a breach in security, you have to report it within 72 hours.
No? Anybody else? No?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anthony Green. Are you here, Anthony? Thank you. Let's sit down. So you have 3 minutes, and I'll.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes, and I'll tell you when you have 30 seconds remaining, and ask you to sum up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair. The need to regulate the taxi industry was born out of the unscrupulous way individuals and companies maximise profit by ignoring such things as vehicle maintenance, having inadequate insurance and not worrying too much about who was driving. As a result of this, the general public demanded local authorities step in and take action. And as a consequence, legislation and regulation developed over the years, with each authority building its regulations to meet its own particular needs and safeguard its local population. So we currently find ourselves in a situation where we have cars and drivers operating in our city who aren't known to you. You find yourselves in a position of having to cede your responsibilities to other licensing authorities and hope they have the same standard as you. Unfortunately, we know that isn't true. Today, you are being asked to grant the renewal of Uber's operator's licence, a company that has been excluded from countries and cities around the world, had licence applications in the UK refused and revoked in London and now in Sheffield. The contempt this company shows towards laws and regulations internationally, nationally and locally is astounding. From stealing the medical records of an Uber driver's rape victim in an attempt to discredit her, renting faulty cars to their drivers in full knowledge of the risk to drivers and passengers, their grey-ball software to help them evade enforcement, withholding information from police regarding serious sexual assaults and other crimes committed by Uber drivers, and the cyber hack resulting in 2.7 million UK Uber customers and drivers having their personal information stolen, only for Uber to pay a $100,000 ransom, then said nothing for a whole year before the information was leaked. Please bear in mind that Fred Jones, Uber's head of cities, immediately reached out to the public to condemn TfL for refusing to relicense Uber in London, yet remained silent on such a serious matter. There are numerous examples of this behaviour, and by its own action, I believe Uber clearly demonstrates it is not a fit and proper person, and that its attitude of break things now, apologise later, indicates it's not to be trusted when assurances are required. Indeed, on the day it launched in York, assurances were given that Uber would only use York registered drivers and cars, and despite repeated promises to its drivers, repeated promises to stop its drivers picking up at taxi ranks and in the train station in particular, they still do so.
30 seconds, please.
They aren't to be trusted. That's me.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions for the Speaker?
Okay,
No?
thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Jim Love. Are you there? Hello, Jim. Sit down. You have 30 seconds, and when you have, sorry, you have 3 minutes when you have 30 seconds. When you have 30 seconds, I'll ask you to sum up. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jim Love, Chairman of Fleetways Taxis in York. I feel compelled to speak to you tonight. I have serious concerns for customers, and I think there are rules for York companies which don't seem to apply to Uber. If I told my drivers to take the following routes, I'd like to know what would happen to Fleetways taxis. These are all direct routes with no pickups on the way. For instance, York Station to Dunnington. It's simple, through the city, to Hull Road, across the A64 and on to Dunnington. I've checked it, it's 5.5 miles. The operator, Uber, tells their drivers to go out of York via Tadcaster Road and onto the bypass and round the A64 to the Hull Road turn-off. It's 10.1 miles. There are no traffic excuses. This was 12:30 at night. There's another one, York Station to Melrose Gate. It's approximately 3 miles. Again, it's simple, and the vehicle should be nowhere near the bypass. The operator, Uber, tells the drivers to again use Tadcaster Road and onto the bypass and round the A64 to Hull Road and then back into York, 10 miles. This was 9 p.m. in the evening. It's robbery, and it's the operator telling them to do this. There's even an Uber route suggesting drivers cross the river via a slipway at the side of the Park Inn to reach Coney Street. It's here. I'll show you them all. Can you relicense an operator that tells drivers to go the long way around? Or do you make allowances because it's Uber? If I told my drivers to go the long way around, we'd lose our licence. One final epic journey, Water End, near the Dogs Home to Lowe's Gate. A journey of 1.3 miles. You could come via Lehman Road, Rugier Street, Micklegate and over Ouse Bridge. It's very simple. The lady wasn't from York and neither was the Uber driver. There were no pickups on the way. This turned into a 40-minute journey. The fare with the York company would have been about £7. The lady was unfortunate the driver took the wrong route and the fare was £13.06. Not bad, just £6 more. But Uber was surge pricing, so she incurred an additional £47.02, making a grand total of £60.08 for a 1.3 mile journey. Let me say that again, £60.08 for a 1.3 mile journey.
30 seconds, Mr. Love.
We'd have taken us to Scarborough for that. Her Uber statement confirms it. It confirms it was 5 miles for a 1.3 mile journey. I've only got 3 minutes. We know many more examples, but how many thousands of these do we not know about? York companies do care, and it's demoralising to learn that these things that Uber actually get away with, and that they tell their drivers to go the wrong way. Is this a fit and proper company? I'll say it again, would you give Fleetways a licence if I told our drivers to go the long way around? I doubt it, so why give Uber one? I have the details here, and all the routes are on Uber's paperwork, if you'd like to see them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Any members have any questions? Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, just to clarify, thank you. The sheets of paper that you have in front of you, is that the evidence that Uber is telling their drivers to go the long way around?
There's on this page, there's one that's a proposed route, which you would get on the app, saying which way the driver's going to take you, and that was round the bypass to get to Dunnington. And there's another one which was an actual route, where the driver left York Station and went out on the A64 Tadcaster Road, right around the bypass, so the whole road turned off, then back into York.
Okay, it's interesting evidence. How have you obtained that?
Because people get this evidence on their phones. It clearly shows them what they've done. They're shooting themselves in the foot. There's a non-existent bridge that goes over the side of the Viking Hotel, the Park Inn. This is an extra one I've put in, just a loop around where it shows it's far from the direct route. And then the final one is £60.08 for a 5 mile journey, which when you look at it on a map is 1.3 miles. And I know for a fact that there was no pickups on any of these, the additional pickups.
Thank you.
Would you like to leave those on the table, Mr. Love,
Yeah.
so that people can have a look at them?
Do you want them passing
No,
around
just
now?
leave them on the table. If people want to look at them during discussion, they can. Anybody else? Thank you. Councillor Mason.
I was just going to say, the paperwork you've left us, is there a way of showing that that is the route Uber's told them to go, opposed to how the drivers chose to go? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, because this is one that says, thank you for your trip with Uber. The blue route marks the route which they actually took, so that's taken. That one is a proposed route which you get initially.
Anybody? Any other members have any questions? Oh, it's gone now anyway. Never mind. The next person on the list is Glenn Jardine, but I don't know that Glenn has arrived. No? Right. And the same with Bill Brolly. Is Bill Brolly here? Slipped in through the net? No? Okay. Lynn Brooke, then. Thank you. You have 3 minutes. You have 30 seconds left. I'll ask you to sum up. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, My name is Lynn Brooke and I am the GMB Trade Union Organiser responsible for members who are private hire and hackney drivers in York. Let me give you some concerning information about Uber and their operations. They failed to properly regulate their drivers, failing to carry out background checks. Uber drivers continue to use the city's ranks to apply for hire. Uber drivers are seen driving illegally, for example, driving the wrong way down one-way streets in York. Uber do not have wheelchair-accessible cars. Uber failed to provide basic rights to their drivers in relation to pay, holidays, pensions and health and safety, and the Employment Tribunal and Employment Appeal Tribunal has found that this is illegal. They claim to operate from an office at Clifton Moor in York, which is unmanned. In October 2016, Uber's systems were hacked and 57 million worldwide and 2.7 million UK users and drivers' accounts were stolen. This was only uncovered due to a leak to the press, which was confirmed by Uber some 13 months after they paid a $100,000 ransom. Who knows if this would ever have come to light if it hadn't been leaked? These are just a small list of issues which seem to follow where Uber operates. The private hire and hackney carriage drivers of York are trained to the highest standards to look after the residents and visitors of York. The visitors to this great city are its lifeblood and should be safely taken to their destinations by those drivers who have the best knowledge of how to get their fares to where they want to be using the shortest, safest and cheapest routes. They are the private hire and hackney carriage drivers of York. At this meeting on the 13th of November 2017, in the minutes, it's noted that the Council, as licensing authority, had a duty to make sure that taxi operators were fit and proper to hold a York licence. I would say that all the evidence shows that Uber is not fit and proper. A number of local authorities around the country are considering whether to reissue Uber with licences. Everyone seems to be looking for a lead on this most important issue. So I would say to you, as the elected representatives of the people of York, to be leaders, not followers. Set an example to the rest of the UK and deny a renewal of this licence. Thank you.
Ms Brooke, thank you. Ms Brooke, you mentioned at the beginning of your speech that Uber is failing to carry out background checks on its drivers. How can you evidence that?
This is evidence that's been gained through the GMB in other regions where we operate, and we actually look after, ironically, Uber drivers who are being improperly trained and illegally.
None of those cases in York?
No.
No. Because there aren't many drivers in York for Uber?
I think it's because there aren't so many and we kind of can keep a track on them much better in York. But there is evidence of that throughout the country.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members?
What background checks is it that they're failing to carry out?
It's usually the background checks on criminal activities that certainly aren't being carried out, and there's evidence of that.
And is that not the licensing authority's responsibility to do the check opposed to Uber? Or do Uber have a responsibility? You know, as a,
no,
for
Uber
example, Fleetways, would they check out?
Uber would be expected to do. All the other hackney and private hire drivers in York carry out those checks for their drivers.
Okay, so as well as getting a DBS by the licensing authority when you apply for your licence, the then firm that you would work for would also do an extra check? With
their employer, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Palmer. There you are. Hello, Mike.
Hello.
You have 3 minutes, and when you get to the 30 seconds remaining, I'll ask you to sum up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Councillors, it's nice to speak to you face to face again. You're here today to judge Uber as a whole, not to judge Uber as a whole, but on the suitability of the empty York office to hold a licence. A hard task because the office is a beachhead for York for the larger company, and as such, all the crimes and misdeeds are laid firmly at the feet of the licence applicant, who is wilfully, negligently and maliciously supplementing his unworkable handful of local cars with out-of-town vehicles in clear abuse of the cross-border hiring law, as Uber are doing up and down the country. This action knowingly lowers the safety of the roads in our city. This is a fact that even the person representing Uber cannot deny. The person who speaks for Uber isn't a taxi driver. They're not an operator as we know it. They're not even from York. They're probably a lawyer, a salesperson, a PR specialist sent to our city to sell you snake oil. They will lie to your faces in here, our council seat. This person will say safe, reliable, affordable. All words we, you, they and the public know to be untrue. Uber York are not safe. They drag drivers from all over England to come here and look at their sat-navs, whilst missing important signs such as one-way street and Hackney carriage rank. They will lie to you that their global app can't perform the simple task of putting a geofence around Hackney ranks at a certain time of day. Is that really hard to programme? It's lies. Reliable is not a word that can apply to Uber York. They can't field a fleet of 10 cars a day. How can you rely on them? Another lie. Their few York drivers, like the 40,000 in London who could find alternative companies to work for, can be welcomed back into the local trade. Affordable? Come on, with fares sometimes over 4 times the rate I charge, how can they say that word with straight faces? That's right, they can't. Their words are crooked, their business model is crooked, their entire premise is bent, like the laws they run roughshod over. Laws you can uphold. Laws to protect people who visit our city and those of us who wish to live here safely. When the Uber representative stands up, look into their eyes. When they say safe, affordable or reliable, look again. Do you trust them? Can you? Will you see them wilt just a little under your gaze because even they don't believe the words they're being paid to say? Nobody pays me to say this, and I say it from the heart. We've given you enough reason not to relicense Uber in York. Do not do it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. I'm not going to be able to do it as well as many of the previous speakers because I can obviously tell they're speaking from the heart as it affects their workplace. I would like to say, as the Labour councillor for Clifton Ward, I've met with taxi drivers, representatives from the private hire associations, and many passengers in my ward, and I've concluded that this application from the transport tech company Uber fails the fit and proper test to be awarded a renewed licence. I want York to embrace innovation and new technology and to be a home for exciting new companies that help residents by providing services that are accessible and affordable. However, all companies in our city must play by the rules and adhere to the high standards we expect, particularly when it comes to the safety of customers. I have serious concerns about public safety with the way the company in question has operated in various locations, both locally and in locations right across the globe since it started up. I feel that Uber's approach and conduct demonstrate a lack of corporate responsibility in relation to reporting serious criminal offences and the fundamentals of obtaining medical certificates and driver background checks. Nationally, there's evidence to show a lack of response to serious sexual allegations made against Uber drivers elsewhere in the UK, and such inaction is a clear risk to the safety and security of the public. The apparent use of specialist software to prevent Uber being subject to regulatory checks indicates the lengths the company may go to in avoiding the level of scrutiny and checks that every taxi and private hire firm should be subject to if the public is to have trust and confidence in it as a provider of local transport. The company has shown itself unable to secure its customers' personal data, as we've previously heard from previous speakers, and there's every chance, of course, that the breach included details of people living and working here in York. Locally, there is obvious growing concern about illegal pickups, applying for hire, lack of clear enforcement about Uber cabs using the taxi ranks, and also the firm being given preferential treatment by this authority on race days at the Knavesmire, which is not fair or equitable to the wider private hire trade in the city. And I am under no illusions that rejecting Uber's application will remove the problems associated with the way the company operates.
30 seconds, Councillor.
Given the Deregulation Act, but nevertheless, there's an important message we should send about this city and the way we operate. Our standards are high, and we should aim to maintain those standards and send a message that they should not be undermined. We cannot and should not simply look the other way when there are practices that could be putting the public's safety at risk. Providing an innovative service is not an excuse for it being unsafe, and I therefore urge members of this committee to reject the application.
Any members have questions for Councillor Myers? Sorry, I didn't notice who indicated first, so we'll go with Councillor Taylor then.
Thank you. Danny, you mentioned some specialist software which is being used, or you claim is being used to prevent regulatory checks. Can you go into that a little bit further?
Yeah, thank you. It's clear that there's a piece of software called Greyball, which the Uber company claims hasn't been used in the UK, but it seems clear that it has been used elsewhere worldwide, and it certainly prevents local authorities from scrutiny and regulation of its service.
Right, I'm still unclear how that works, but I think you've given me a bit more detail.
It seems like an extension to its innovative software.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Thanks. You mentioned there have been sexual assaults where the operator hadn't complied or hadn't, I don't know what the word is, dealt with the council properly or hadn't liaised with the council properly. Which authorities is that, so we can pick that up with the operator later?
Yeah, so this is in particular relation to a Met police officer's letter, Metropolitan London police officer's letter, the head of the taxi and private hire wing of Met Police, where he uses quite damning language to talk about 20 or 30 cases that he's aware of.
The only problem is obviously that's TfL, I imagine. Have you got anything that's outside of London, any other authorities?
I think that would be a good question to ask them.
Anybody else have any questions for Councillor Myers? No? Thank you, Councillor Myers. So our final speaker is Neil McGonigal. Sorry. So you have 3 minutes as well.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'll keep it brief. My name is Neil McGonigal, Head of Cities for Uber across the north of England. Just want to outline some of the reasons why we're applying to renew our operator's licence with York Council. Over the course of the last 12 months, we've seen a steady increase in the number of people looking to use the service we provide within York. There's now over 28,000 people that regularly use the Uber app to get from A to B within the city. From our experience, the passengers love the ability to have the convenience of pressing a button to request a car, take a trip without having to use cash at all, and from a safety point of view, being able to track every element of that journey real time, whether that's themselves, family members, friends, or whatever, through the app. Most of those people are locals and native to York, but increasingly we're seeing a lot of visitors to York and a lot of international visitors use the service. Over the last few months alone, we've had people from 73 different countries outside of the UK using the Uber app within this area. So what we're seeing is increasingly international visitors, whether they're tourists, whether they're people here on business, are coming with the expectation of being able to use their Uber app to safely, affordably, reliably, I will use the same words because I believe in them, get around this city. I'm very proud of the service that we provide to those 28,000 people. Personally, I believe that increased choice in competition is a good thing for both passengers and drivers in terms of helping increase standards across the board. But I'm also very proud of the relationship we've been able to develop with the council and with licensing over the course of the year. There are numerous examples of where we've worked cooperatively as a licensed private hire operator to either tackle a certain issue or to improve something in a certain area. They would include communications we push out to drivers, for example, safe places to park while taking a break, using technology within the app to actually address some of the issues that we reported around private hire vehicles picking up on Hackney ranks or near Hackney ranks. On the odd occasion, where there has been a driver who's committed an offence while using the app, for example, applying for hire, we've been incredibly open and cooperative with the council in providing all the information they need to bring a prosecution, and then finally working with third parties, the likes of the racecourse, the likes of the railway station, to again use the technology within the app to actually improve and optimise the experience for a passenger being picked up. So I'm really keen to be able to not only maintain that relationship with the council, but ideally to build upon it over the coming years, and that's why we've submitted the application to renew our operator's licence. Thank you for taking the time to consider it. I'm sure there might be some questions, so happy to take them.
Does anybody have any questions for Councillor Crisp? Anybody else? Okay, on you go, Councillor Crisp.
Can I ask, what is Uber's involvement in the contract between the customer using the app and the driver of the vehicle? In other words, who accepts the booking, Uber or the driver?
I think there's two separate things here. The booking is absolutely accepted by Uber Britannia Limited as the holder of the private operator's licence, and that has to be the case to, to comply with the regulation ensconced in the 1976 Act. In terms of the contract, there is a contract for booking services that sits between Uber Britannia Limited and the passenger. That would have, and apologies if we get a little bit too legal, a bit too technical, but that would include all the deemed provisions of the 1976 Act. So that's basically things like, as an operator, maintaining booking records or handling lost property or that type of thing. The contract for transportation services sits between the driver and the passenger. There's nothing within the regulatory framework that would prevent that, and indeed, it's actually quite a common model with a large number of private hire firms around the UK.
Further, and do you have any more questions, Councillor?
Yeah. So, if you're saying that the contract is between the driver and the passenger, then I'm a bit confused here. If it's between the driver and the passenger, surely Uber can accept that the driver must have a private hire operator's licence.
The contract. So the contract for the booking services is between Uber and the passenger. It's the contract for the transportation services. So Uber, as the operator, accepting the booking and compliance with all of the conditions we need to comply with per the 1976 Act, that contract for booking services sits squarely between Uber and the passenger. And that's where the compliance with the 1976 Act comes in. I've got Ryan from our legal team. I don't think that's all, Ryan.
Any further questions?
I'm sorry, Chair, that doesn't explain it.
We can try to explain again that there's two contracts. There's a contract for booking services, so where Uber operates as the private hire operator, accepting the booking and managing all elements of that booking, so having a set of booking records that are available to the licensing team to inspect, or whether it's dealing with lost property that are related to that particular booking. Uber is responsible for that contract with the passenger, per the 1976 Act and per the private hire operator conditions that York City Council impose. The actual transportation services, the contract for that, sits between the driver and the passenger. And that's a model that actually exists with a large number of private hire companies within the UK today.
Can you use your microphone, please, Councillor Crisp?
I'm a little bit confused then. So, So who is responsible then for the safety of the passenger? Is presumably the responsibility for the safety of the passenger who's booked through the Uber app is, if the contract for the journey is between the passenger and driver, is the driver and not Uber.
The contract for the
correct?
booking would be, the responsibility for the booking would sit with Uber, so the responsibility for the safety of the passenger that's made that booking or any associated passengers would rest with Uber.
With Uber. So does that mean that it's Uber's responsibility to make sure that every vehicle that is registered to use the Uber app has completed the correct checks for MOTs, for all of that sort of thing, and has the proper insurance in place?
Exactly. So it's our responsibility to make sure that every booking is dispatched to a private hire driver that holds a private hire driver licence that matches the private hire vehicle licence of the vehicle the booking's being dispatched to, and for ensuring for that vehicle that we've got full documentation, whether it's MOT, insurance or whatever, that we would hold for that particular vehicle.
Okay, so then my final question to that is, what steps are Uber taking to make all of those checks? How do you make all of those checks for all of these drivers who have apps?
So again, I guess it's where we use technology to our advantage. So I think I was quite confused by some of the statements were made before about background checks. I think Councillor Mason probed on a little bit, because that responsibility in terms of DBS checks quite clearly sits with the local authority, and you can't obtain a private hire driving licence with any local authority within England and Wales without going through disclosure and bar and service doing the background checks. So what we do with, I guess for Uber is, as a driver, to have a kind of active Uber account, you'd need to have a valid private hire driver's licence and a valid DVLA card. And our technology would capture that documentation and, importantly, capture the expiry date of it. For the vehicle that driver's looking to use, would then look to hold a valid private hire vehicle licence, MOT certificate and certificate of insurance. Again, all of those documents would be verified and would have the expiry date maintained on our systems. What that means, and where we use the technology, is as soon as one of those documents would lapse or expire, so it goes beyond its expiry date without being renewed or replaced by the driver, then that driver's access to the account is immediately suspended until such a time as they replace the document. So we are always confident that the drivers and vehicles that are active on Uber app have a full set of valid documentation associated with it, to private hire driver's licence, whether it's an MOT or whether it's an insurance certificate. Does that answer your question, Councillor Crisp?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wells.
I was going to ask a very, very similar question, but...
Councillor Crisp, can you turn your microphone off?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I was going to ask relatively the same question, but I'm interested in one of the things that you've said. 28,000 York people have the app and are regularly using Uber.
Yeah.
Are they receiving a service from York Uber drivers, or are they relying on Uber from elsewhere?
It'll be a combination. It will be whichever is the...
Sorry, it's not a comedy show, so if you don't mind.
It'll be a combination. The booking will be dispatched to whichever happens to be the most conveniently located driver and vehicle for that particular passenger. The reason we do that is it keeps down, well, it's good for the passenger in terms of obviously make sure they get a vehicle as quickly as possible. It's good for the driver because it's minimising the amount of dead mileage that they'd be driving to a booking without a paying passenger in the back. And it's good for the environment because, again, it's reducing the amount of dead mileage that's taking place on the roads.
So how many York Uber drivers are there then? And
so York licence is about 10 at the moment, and that was information that was supplied to Leslie as part of the application.
Okay, thank you. Turn your microphone on. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think that one of the crux of this matter is actually within this document, which is your document, which is the terms and conditions that the hirer would accept if they were to enter into a contract with Uber.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the crucial parts of that document are the limitations and liabilities. And I'd like you to comment on this section, please. This is under...
So, do you
Just
mind? I've got
questions, Councillor Haynes, just questions, not comments or debate, just questions. Thank you. Just because what you said made me think you were leading on to turning it into a bit more than
If
that.
it's a deeply
Just-
technical
just
question,
questions.
would you mind if I asked our my legal colleagues?
Yeah, it is a question, but I need to have a preamble with the detail. This is on, it's actually just above number 6 in the terms and conditions of the document terms and conditions, booking service terms. And I'd like you to comment on this particular section, which is the indemnity section. And it says, and this is a message to the hirer, so to speak, you agree to indemnify and hold Uber and its officers, directors and employees and agents harmless from any and all claims, demands, losses, liabilities and expenses, including attorney fees, arising out of or in connection with your use of service or services or goods obtained through the use of those services, your breach or violation of any of these terms, Uber uses of your user content, your violation of the rights of any third party, including third party providers. Could you just comment on that section, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the limitation of liability section applies to the use of the app services. So it's not really relating to the booking services. I'd also just comment that the vast majority of private hire operators in this country don't even have written terms. So all of that stuff is done, on a very kind of low level. So the limitation of liability section that you've just put out there relates to the use of the app and not to the booking services themselves.
But nonetheless, it says here that the directors, employees and agents are harmless of any claim, demand or losses, liabilities and expenses. So am I not right in feeling that allows Uber to renege on any responsibilities that might occur during that?
As I said before, that relates purely to the use of the app, not the booking services with which sits directly with Uber Britannia Limited. So I think the terms that you're reading out there are the rider terms with Uber BV, which they govern the use of the app, which is used by Uber Britannia Limited in much the same way as many other private hire operators around the country license technology such as Skyline, other apps which is booking services.
So would you like to say, Ryan, that that's not relevant at all to the contract for the booking services which relate to Uber Britannia Limited's private hire operator, which is really material to the debate we're having, and the role of Uber BV, which licenses the software, the app that a user might have on his iPhone, would be a completely separate subject and debate to what we're debating here today.
In terms of our liability to riders under the booking services, that absolutely sits with Uber Britannia Limited as the licensed private hire operator. So Uber BV is slightly a separate entity for these purposes.
I feel that you're making the point I'm trying to make, which is that it appears to me that the relationship that a potential user of an Uber car makes is actually with an app and not with a person. And the licensing is for a person. And clearly, the relationship is with an app. We have an empty office in Clifton.
I think maybe to give an example that might help kind of clarify what we're debating here. So the software out there called iCabby, which is similar to Uber, it allows you to, private hire operators to provide services in an app-based way. So iCabby provide that software. They're not related to any particular private hire operator. If a certain operator, I don't know, say an operator called, Neil's Cabs in Merseyside, happened to use that iCabby software to save its passengers, there would be, a similar contract for the customer that's using that iCabby software on his smartphone. That's the equivalent of Uber BV. It's just licensing the app, the software, to be used on the smartphone. The actual operation of, Uber within York, using York licensed vehicles and drivers, is what Uber Britannia Limited, as an operator, represented by myself and Ryan today, that is what Uber Britannia Limited look after. What, sorry?
I'll probably return to this, but I feel that this is a fairly crucial point.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richardson was next to indicate, so then it'll be you, Councillor.
Thank you. Just to sort of delve down a bit further into this, you say that the booking is with yourselves. Does the client pay directly to you, or do they pay for the transport directly to the driver?
So the payment is processed through Uber BV. So the payment is paid directly from the rider to Uber BV, and BV then pays the driver.
Right.
After it's deducted its service fee.
After it deducts
its service fee for the use of the app by the driver.
But it says on this page here that there is a right to introduce it. It doesn't say you will.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Can you say it again?
It says there is
Where?
reserves the right. It's on payment.
Underpayment. Underpayment on this
You're looking
supplement
at, you're looking at the terms.
It's number 5 on this extra document.
It says payment here. Booking services are provided by Uber UK to you free of charge.
I think you're looking at the rider terms there, not the driver terms.
But the driver...
So the booking fee is deducted from the amount that the driver is paid. There is no...
Right, but...
There is no fee to a rider to use the app. And I think you're looking at the rider terms there.
Right.
So Uber Britannia Limited do not charge a fee to...
Any other questions?
Well, yeah, there's just... So, given that this is all done on booking through Uber, through its whatever network you want to use, how do you make sure that each driver inspects their vehicle before they start a shift?
Yeah.
So that would be, I guess, and it will differ from authority to authority, what obligations sit with either the operator or the vehicle proprietor in terms of conducting checks. There might be certain authorities where there's a requirement, for example, on the operator to conduct a set number of random checks at the base every week, which we'll do in those authorities where it's required as part of the conditions. Other authorities, it would be an expectation that would be set of all drivers that they should ensure before they go out to use the app that their vehicle is in a safe and roadworthy condition. But that obligation, that responsibility would sit with the driver or the proprietor of the vehicle.
So you wouldn't keep a record?
If it's not required as per the operator conditions, then...
That's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in response to one of the earlier questions about dead mileage and the environmental advantages of that.
Yeah.
Do Uber do an analysis, as drivers are coming from sometimes hundreds of miles, do Uber do an analysis of the amount of dead mileage there is in all those drivers travelling from all over the country?
So I think what I'd say, I mean, if you take something like a race day in York, you might get, and I think it's probably fair to point out as well, I think we're here to debate the legislation and the regulation around cross-border driving. It's something that's part of the debate for this particular committee hearing. But if you've got a large race day at York Racecourse, then I think it's actually, my view is it's actually beneficial to have a larger number of vehicles available to help service and disperse. You might have 20, 30, 40,000 people visiting that racecourse that you need to get away. In that circumstance, I think it's actually beneficial to have additional vehicles, additional capacity to help disperse a large capacity crowd.
Do you do an audit of an analysis of where your drivers go over the country and what impact that has environmentally?
We wouldn't do an audit on that, no.
But you do have environmental credentials that you promote.
Yeah, we've got a clean air plan that we announced a couple of months ago where we've made a commitment.
So to further that, shouldn't you do an analysis of that kind of travel?
That's something that we might look at through the course of 2018.
Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
I'm afraid I've got a fair few questions, I'm afraid. Some for you and some for the officers. In terms of, if we just talk about Sheffield, if you don't mind, briefly.
Yeah.
Can you just clarify what the issue was in Sheffield?
Yeah, so the issue was the reason that the operator's licence was suspended was because Sheffield Council issued, and officers will probably be familiar with this, 2 Section 73 notices asking us to respond to 4 specific questions. Unfortunately, there was a fairly fundamental admin error within the council, which meant that those letters were sent to an address that actually didn't exist. So the letters were never received by Uber. We have met with Sheffield City Council, we've resolved the matter, we've answered all of the questions that they originally wanted us to answer, and that suspension has now been lifted. I believe Sheffield City Council will be making that statement public, if not already, then tomorrow morning. So that's lifted, that suspension, yeah. It's lifted. I met with Sheffield City Council this afternoon. Before
We're on Sheffield City Council, so that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Any further questions, Councillor
Yeah,
Mason?
sadly, but the relevance of the question was that the information I had was something to do with it had a name on the licence which was incorrect, or something. Was that not the case? It was to do with an address?
It was to do with a Section 73 request, so it was asking for specific questions and it was sent to the wrong address. It was a mixture of a current address and that for whatever reason missed out half of the address, so they missed out the building name, the floor number, they'd also put an incorrect postcode link to an old address. Why Sheffield Council did that,
that's
I
fine.
don't know.
It would have left a different question in if it had been the name, but it doesn't matter now. In terms of the directors of Uber London, are they the same directors of Uber Britannia?
So Uber Britannia Limited is Tom Elmwood and Fred Jones, but Uber London Limited, is that the same, Ryan?
Same plus Laurel.
As our new non-executive chairman.
Non-executive.
Yeah.
So three directors for London, but 2 for Uber Britannia. Yeah. They're the same, okay. Just in terms of the maps and stuff we've seen today and the comments about routes and stuff, have you got anything to kind of say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of points. One is, I mean, it's difficult to comment on specific examples. The passenger is always given an indication of what the route will be and particularly what the fare will be in advance, including any surge pricing or dynamic pricing that might be applied. So the passenger always has that informed decision on whether they want to take the journey or not. There's no, I guess, kind of human directing a driver to go a particular route. There's an algorithm within the app that will try to set out what is deemed to be the quickest, most efficient route, but the driver is not forced to follow that. And if the passenger has a preferred route and best practices, we'd always advise drivers to ask the passenger if they have a preferred route they want to take. Then the driver is completely, at liberty to take that. Where we do get inbound to our customer service team that complain about being overcharged, that the driver's taking them around the houses, or taking them on a circuitous route. Again, the beauty of the technology we use is our customer service agents can immediately see what destination the passengers input, what route was originally that the price was, or the estimate was based upon, what route the driver actually took. And unless there's any mitigating factors, such as roadworks or such as requested pickups or drop-offs, then we have the ability to refund the passenger, which we oftentimes will do.
I think that's everything for now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mason. Yep. Councillor Crisp? Can you put your mic on, please, Councillor Crisp?
Just based on the answer you just gave,
yeah.
If somebody books an Uber through the app,
yeah,
gets the price, gets in, and it goes in a very long route, and then partway through that long journey, if they've been directed around, particularly if it's directed around the ring road, it will be a long route and it will be a long journey. If the surcharge then kicks in, might they not get that surprise at the end of the journey?
No, because the surge charging would come into effect before the journeys commence, because it's all to do with what level of customer demand exists in the area the customer is looking to take an Uber from at that particular time. So the surge pricing would always be applicable. The only reason that price would increase then would be if the route taken was longer than the route that the passenger was expected to take.
Sorry to interrupt. A surge price can never kick in halfway through a route.
No, can't.
It's set and agreed to by the passenger prior to the journey commencing.
So the price could increase if the route is longer than expected, but it wouldn't increase due to surge pricing kicking in, as Ryan said.
Right, so you say it will only increase if the journey is longer than expected?
Yes.
So if they take the route that they've been directed on and that journey is longer than expected because of being given a very congested route, for instance, which local drivers would know about, Uber drivers and out-of-town drivers probably wouldn't know about, could that increase the costs?
Not necessarily. I mean, you'll find that a lot of drivers in this day and age will use Waze because you can have the best knowledge of a particular city or town and know all the quickest routes and the kind of app ones and that, but you're never going to have real-time knowledge of there might have been, you know, a pile-up on the ring road, or there might be, you know, a sudden set of roadworks that have been introduced on a road you might not have travelled down for a week. So we'll tend to find a lot of drivers this day and age will use Waze anyway, and the beauty of technology like Waze is it will take all of that into account and direct the driver down what will be the quickest, most efficient route to get to the destination.
So if I just sort of make that simple, if the journey is a long one because of something that they couldn't foresee, they didn't foresee, so it takes them longer,
yeah,
could the price of the trip increase?
So the price could have, if it's taken a lot longer. At the end of that journey, you'd either have, if the driver felt that they were at fault for some reason, then the driver is, through their version of the app, able to flag that and request that the fare should be reviewed and reduced, or if the customer themselves had agreed at what they've been charged because it's more than what they were estimated before they took the trip, then again, they'll have the same facility to contact Uber and we'll review the trip and, if appropriate, we'll apply a refund straight onto their account.
Okay. We aren't really meant to be discussing the Uber platform, but I've allowed some of those questions to go ahead simply because they are actually, I think, applicable to how Uber operates here, although I note the comment that Neil Ferris made earlier about the platform, so I've let that go. Does anybody have any further questions for either Neil or, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Sorry, to Ryan.
Councillor Hayes.
You gave us the numbers of Uber drivers that are licensed in York. It's about 10. It's the numbers of Uber drivers that are coming
Councillor Press, could you turn your
that are coming from outside the city. Can you, I mean, I presume you must have a pretty good idea of the number of drivers from outside the city that are
Councillor
coming
Hayes,
to
I'm
York.
ever so sorry, but that isn't really applicable in this case. We're talking about Uber here, and we're not talking about the drivers that come in from other parts of the area.
I think it's highly. We've got a series of complaints. We know how many complaints there are. We have 897 drivers that are registered in York, of which 10 of them we know are Uber drivers. So therefore, I'm trying to establish what is the balance between the number of drivers coming to York and the complaints that are being given, as against the number of... I think it's a very relevant question.
I think an equally relevant question would be, I don't know if I have the breakdown out of those complaints, how many were raised by the trade and how many were raised by the public or passengers. I don't know if we've got that information to hand.
And conversely, so do we know the numbers? I mean,
actually, that was one of the questions I was going to put to Leslie about complaints. So, do you have any further questions?
Are we going to get an answer to that question?
Yeah.
Do we know how many drivers come from outside?
That's commercially sensitive information. I wouldn't be prepared to provide in a public arena.
So, no, then in that case.
If I may, Chair, that question was considered last year by members in coming to their conclusion, and Uber agreed at that time to divulge that information to members of the committee, making the decision in private. So if you wish to, obviously, if Uber were willing to do so again, you may wish to exercise the right to take that information in private if you choose to do so.
I mean, it seems apparent that if there are 28,000 customers, then that service cannot be provided by 10 drivers.
I don't think that's indisputed. No. I don't think that was part of what the debate was.
Do members want to withdraw then to... Do you want me to, should I take the follow-up question or just do the withdrawal?
I mean,
No, we need to.
can I just confirm, before members consider whether they wish to withdraw, would Uber be prepared to divulge that information to members in private?
It may take some time, so we'd need to contact people at the office. We need to put a request in to run that analysis. I think when we did it last year, it was in the middle of the day. We're now doing it at approaching 6:30 in the evening. So it's not information I have at my fingertips.
All right,
It's
okay,
something
fair
we need to run the
So-
analysis.
so
But
it's-
equally, I'm not sure. We are prepared to provide it.
But it's not an option for this evening?
We'd have to ask the question. We'd have to.
Would you not even have a ballpark figure?
Probably a ballpark figure I'd be prepared to provide, but again, not on a public forum.
No. Okay. Members.
Okay. Yeah, are you prepared to provide a ballpark figure? Go ahead then.
In private.
No, I meant in private. Yeah. You're going to do that. Yeah?
Do you want me to take further questions first and then we can break
Yes,
it out?
yes. Yeah. We'll take further questions and then we'll do that.
Yes, comments been made that you have 28,000 registered users in York. Would you know whether all those 28,000 registered users who live in York use the app in York, or have they registered so that you can use it
So
when they're across the country?
Should have clarified that's 28,000 people that have used the app within York, as opposed to 28,000 people that are registered with an account to a York address. So it's
Right.
people that have used the app in the last 3 months within this area.
York. Okay, thank you very much.
Anybody else got any other questions? No? Okay then. So,
Do members wish to
yeah. Do you wish to? So my plan would be for the members to withdraw to the other room while we go ahead with this question, rather than asking everybody in the audience to shift, because I think there's, on balance, fewer of us. So we're going into the Lehman room? Yes? Which is that way.
Do you want us
the
to
Lehman room's
immediately
through
join you,
there.
Chair?
Sorry?
Do you want us to immediately join you in that room?
Yes, yeah?
Yeah.
You'll have to find that information for us. So,
Yeah,
all right, members. Concluded the restricted information part of the meeting. I've asked Neil Ferris to make some points and some comments on some of the things that have been said tonight and help us get some clarity on certain issues. So I'll hand back to him.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just like to start off by responding to the comments that were made around the council giving preferential treatment to Uber. The authority does not give preferential treatment to any operator. Its officers apply the council policies equally to all companies. So I just wanted to make that clear, particularly because there's so many representatives of the trade within the room. Secondly, I'd just like to look at the software provider. That software provider, in terms of the platform itself, as I said at the start of the meeting, is not making the application for the licence. It's common, I understand, for within the trade for different pieces of software to be used. That is not a matter for consideration this evening. Thirdly, in respect of members need to consider the fitness of an operator that has provided services for 28,000 users across the city and continues to provide and is effectively patronised by the people of the city. Fourthly, in respect of the issue of who the contract is with, this would apply to a number of other operators in the city. So where the drivers themselves are self-employed, we have a licensed operator centre in this city, and the drivers are all self-employed. It's a similar arrangement to that was described by Uber, in the fact that the booking is made with the company, but the actual contract for transport is with the individual driver. If that was not the case, then the employees that put themselves forward as self-employed within the city would become employees of those companies, which they're not. So it's not an unusual model in that regard. And finally, I would refer back to much of the issues raised in respect of the data protection breach. This is a relevant matter for members to consider in respect of the fit and proper test for Uber Britannia, because obviously they were custodians of the data. However, I would refer members to the fact that this is the subject of an ongoing Information Commissioner investigation, which is yet to conclude. So we've got to understand what that conclusion is in respect of how you wish to consider it. Finally, I would just refer back to my statements at the start of the meeting. This decision is solely about the fit and proper use of, fit and proper nature of Uber Britannia to hold a licence on the balance of probability that of the information before you. It's not to consider other matters. If you determine to give Uber Britannia a shorter licence period, you need to give explicit reasons for doing so. And equally, if you determine not to provide them with a licence as well.
Thank you very much, Neil. Leslie, could I just ask you to make some comment about the complaints that were received about Uber drivers? I know you don't know in any great detail, but of the four. Make it quick.
What Neil said was there was 28,000 users, but what was clarified by Uber was that it was not 28,000 users, but 28,000 uses.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie, could I just ask you about the complaints that were received about Uber drivers specifically? Was it, for instance, were the four one person, or were they a mixture of different issues?
Just to clarify, Chair, is that the four complaints that we received about your licensed
Yes,
Uber
yes.
drivers?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, we've had four complaints in relation to Uber, one of which related to a claim that no one was working in their office, so that's more of a complaint regarding the operator itself rather than a licensed driver. One of our licensed drivers was witnessed doing an illegal left turn, and they received a written warning. We received one complaint that a vehicle was not displaying its licence plates, which, as you know, they have to legally display on the front and rear of the vehicle. However, that vehicle at that time was operating on temporary plates, therefore they can be in the windows. And one is in relation to a driver's conduct, and that is in the hands of the police at this moment in time. And on receipt of that complaint and on receiving and sharing information with Uber, he was removed from their platform, and we're awaiting a decision with regard to how the police are taking that forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So do any members have any further questions for either Leslie or for Neil? Councillor Crisp.
Just to clarify, you were talking about the 4 complaints about York licensed Uber drivers. So you wouldn't be necessarily aware if they're not licensed in York, because there could be Uber drivers working in York but not licensed here. Is that so? Although you're saying there's only been the 4 complaints about Uber drivers, they're York licensed Uber drivers. There are a lot more Uber drivers in York than those, because a lot of out-of-town ones.
If members go to Annex 4 of the report, there is a detailed list with regards to all the complaints that we have received, whether they're in relation to Uber vehicles and out-of-town Uber vehicles. Like, for example, since the licence was renewed on the 21st of December last year, we've had 44 complaints about Bradford licensed Uber vehicles. And then on the second page of that, on page 40, going on to page 41, it's complaints relating to York drivers and vehicles, so vehicles and drivers licensed by this authority, so our normal Hackney carriage and private hire. And then we do receive other general complaints and inquiries, and again, that's listed on there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Reid, and then Councillor Richardson, and then Councillor Orr.
Can, just to make it clear to me, and perhaps to others, if the committee does not grant this licence, that does not stop out-of-town drivers coming to York for trade. Is that right? Albeit Uber or anybody else?
Yeah, that's correct. As long as they are legally booked through a licensed operator and a licensed vehicle and driver fulfills that booking, and they're all licensed by the same authority, they can legally operate in this authority area.
Okay, thank you. So this might not make this decision, doesn't stop those as many as has been coming in from coming in the future.
Councillor Richardson, I've got you on my list.
Follows up from that point. It follows up from that point. Mike Palmer referred to a cross-border hiring law. What, can you explain that to us, Leslie?
Yeah, the Deregulation Act that came in 2015 introduced a new provision where private hire companies can now legally, for saying sake, a York licensed private hire operator could legally pass that booking to a licensed private hire operator from Leeds, where previously you hadn't been able to do that. You could only pass a booking to another licensed private hire operator within your home authority area. So you're allowed to do a cross-border booking. So, as I say...
So it's, as the gentleman shouted out behind me, is it like a subcontract in some
Yes, yeah, you can subcontract the work out. So a York operator could take the booking and subcontract that booking to a private hire operator licensed in another authority area.
Okay, so it's not really the same as the question from Councillor Reid about out-of-town drivers coming in to do work in York. So
No, it isn't the same.
Okay.
It isn't the same, no.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Leslie, page 36, there are a number of points. Item 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. Has any of that information been provided by Uber to this council?
Yes.
All of it?
If we've requested the information, they've supplied what we've requested.
It says that they shall provide, not when requested, on a number of days.
Yeah, it's part of, because we issue licences now for private hire operators for a maximum of 5 years, we have systems in place that annually we would go to them and request information.
So, but you have none of this for many of the drivers that Uber are employing, just to clarify.
Sorry, can you just ask me that again?
So, the drivers working for Uber have not provided any of this information. I just want to clarify something. That's the point I'm trying to get to.
We request this information from the operator. Not the drivers.
Yeah.
It's a requirement of the operator to provide
But
this
you've
information.
not had them from the drivers?
No, we get it from
Right.
the operator.
Thank you. All
Okay.
will become clear.
Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. Over recent years, our policy has encouraged taxi drivers to get electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles as part of our policies. And we've heard from the Uber spokesman earlier about the dead mileage that's involved. We also have a council-wide policy of One Planet York. I'm a bit disappointed that there isn't an analysis in terms of One Planet York and Uber in this report.
The question before members this evening is fit and proper, not environmental impact.
Chair, that could influence whether we think they're fit and proper.
It isn't a consideration in the legislation whether or not there's an environmental impact or not.
Sorry, no. Well, I have to agree to disagree then. Councillor Taylor, then Councillor Mason, then Councillor Crisp.
Thank you. Leslie, there was an allegation earlier on that Uber as an operator was not doing certain background checks. What background checks is an operator required to do? DBS checks, health checks, medical checks, vehicle checks? What are they required to do?
From the perspective in York, we don't put any obligations on a private hire operator to do checks on drivers. We do all the necessary checks. We do the disclosure and barring service check. We make sure they've had a Group 2 medical and all the other checks that have to be undertaken. A private hire operator may take it upon themselves to do similar checks if they wish, but we do that as a licensing authority.
Thank you. Does that suggest that some other authorities might do that differently?
Each authority has their own process, application process and requirements for licensed drivers. I'm not aware of a licensing authority that doesn't do disclosure and barring service checks and things of that nature.
Or medical checks?
Yeah.
Or vehicle checks?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you. On the restricted papers, obviously there's a copy of the applicant's application, and there's a section that says, have you ever been refused a licence? Yes or no, and then provide details. When you designed that form and had that question, what was the inference of that? What would you, as an officer, if you were considering a company, say another company wanted to open up that had other companies closed down or refused a licence, why was that question built in? What was it for? It's obviously to get something about them being fit and proper to hold the licence, because you're asking if they've had any taken away. I just wondered how that would be used or what the guidance is around that question. And I'm being a bit fluffy because I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say, but I hope you can understand what I'm trying to get at.
It's a standard question with regards to ascertaining if somebody's fit and proper. We ask this exactly the same question on a driver applicant's application form. And it's basically, if they have been suspended or revoked or refused in another authority area, we'd like to know the grounds of why.
And then the annex that we've got just lists... Sorry. The annex we've got then in the restricted papers just lists authorities, doesn't it?
If you turn to page 21, it does list the ones that were suspended, revoked or refused. They did provide that information.
21? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Have you finished, Councillor Mason? All right, I thought you were going to carry on. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Councillor Richardson. Oh no, I beg your pardon. Councillor Crisp indicated first, then you can go after Councillor Crisp.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the question's for Neil, really. You've told us what we should be considering, what we shouldn't be considering, really, and how we should be dealing with a fit and proper question. So, at this council, we're really proud of our equality stance. So, should we not be considering that there are no wheelchair accessible vehicles provided by Uber at all? They don't have a policy of providing a certain number of wheelchair accessible vehicles. I know there are none operating in York by Uber. Is that not something we should consider as whether it's fit and proper?
I think in respect of the council's own policies, these are obviously things that the licensing committee may wish to consider in respect of the policy. Tonight's decision is about the fit and proper operator, not the nature of the vehicles they're providing. We don't make it a requirement of the operators across the city. If that's a will of members to try to do that, then obviously that's something for a policy matter to take forward. But tonight's decision is about the fitness of the operator, not the aspirations of the council in respect of policy.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Richardson. No? Anybody else? Anybody else? Councillor Hayes.
In terms of the fit and proper person aspect of this, I mean, this is obviously utterly crucial to the whole debate. I mean, we know that there are 296 complaints, of which 155 relate to Uber vehicles. So we can see that there is an imbalance there. We won't go into the numbers because that's obviously confidential in terms of the numbers of cars, etc. But to me, this relationship with fit and proper, we seem to be discussing this as though it were a person. But we really have a very remote person. We've got somebody who is applying to York from London, but nonetheless that person may well be applying around the world because there's a reference to China and America within these various connections. So we operate as a local authority viewing York from our perspective and try to maintain those standards. We're not actually dealing with a person here.
Can you, whoever's got the thing,
Who's got it?
oh,
Yeah,
right, right.
okay.
sorry.
So just in response to that, it's a legal entity, it's a legal person so it's that entity that we're talking about, and as far as I'm aware, that applies to many other organisations that we grant licences to in the city. And whilst they may have familiar names to the residents of York and to members around this table, the ultimate owners of those companies and the beneficiaries and the finances of those companies, we do not know.
Anybody else? Anybody else? No? Okay, so we're going to move into a debate now. And I'll open the table up to you to make any comments and start a discussion as you see fit. Anybody want to kick off? Sorry. Damn. Sorry.
As an opening.
Anybody like to start the discussion? Councillor Richardson. No?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a lot of information. I'm still a bit. I'm not quite sure this connection between Uber and the drivers, whether that's actually a safe aspect when it comes to getting into a taxi. A standard taxi is you assume that your contract is with the company if you booked it, or if it's an independent, it's with that taxi. This, well, we're using it that, well, we take the money and we take the booking fee, to me means there is some sort of connection, but then and then we pay the driver, but you're actually not, because you are actually responsible to the driver because he's taking you. It's a very confusing situation, and I don't think there will be time for anybody getting into a taxi to actually be given that explanation to say, well, this is where you are. And by the way, if anything happens, there might be a bit of an issue because it depends where it lies. It depends whether it lies with me as I'm just transporting you, therefore you pay me for that bit, or you're booking with who you think you are booking, who are in the World Wide Web, whatever, and you think that they are the person that you have a contract with. Now, to me, that isn't safe. Anywhere where there's uncertainty is not safe, and that's part of my concern with the fact that there aren't these answers. Yes, it's possibly a tax situation that by moving it from this to this, but if I was getting into a taxi, I would hope that when I book it, that is the company I would go and sue if something happened, rather than an independent that would, well, he's responsible, whereas this is, it's very unclear. Because the insurance doesn't say, it says the company is insured.
But we aren't discussing the platform here. That's not the point of this discussion. It's about the fit and proper test for this company to have
But that then goes back
have
to
an operator's licence. It's not about the platform.
No, it's about the fact that when we come to these tests about whether a driver's checked his vehicle or whether they are checked regularly when they turn up to do a session, are they inspected say they were coming from Leeds, are they inspected there before they come here and then they start work here, or are they inspected here and when they're actually going to then start playing here? There's none of that information is there, which is why I was trying to get about who actually provides the information. We know Uber's providing certain information, but none of the drivers providing us.
Can I just, again, just clarify?
It's a safety issue.
The operator, because obviously it seems to have got some confusion, it's not unusual to have a self-employed driver and the member of the public books with a company. We have operators in the city that use that methodology. So Uber are using the same concept. Effectively, you have a self-employed driver and you're booking with another entity, the operator, and it's the operator's licence we're looking at this evening. In respect to that driver, whom, as you rightly say, the member of the public has a degree of expectation and confidence with, they have to be a licensed driver. For the purposes of the Deregulation Act, that driver does not any longer have to be a licensed driver for York. They are often, and this is the case and has been made many times tonight, that licensed driver may be from elsewhere and outside of the area. But that, again, is not the matter in consideration in front of you tonight. It's about the fitness and proper test for the operator.
Right.
And the operation is not unusual in terms of its structure.
And the operator... Sorry. The operator has a control requirement, and therefore, if the control requirement doesn't work, it is a safety.
I was just going to suggest, is it worth the legal officer just going through what grounds we can refuse this application on? I'm not predetermining, but so we can try and focus what we're talking about around what we can actually talk about, if that makes sense.
Yes, it is that simple, that the test is whether or not it's a fit and proper operator, whether or not that legal entity, the company, Britannia Limited, is one that you feel confident is fit and proper in the way that they have carried out their role as an operator in the city. There are other factors as well that you can take into account that are wider, for example, the data breach and how they've dealt with that. That goes to how fit and proper that entity is, so that would be relevant for you today. How they deal with complaints is relevant. How they deal with taking people off the platform if there have been complaints, and how they go about managing the business generally. These are all issues that go to whether or not they're fit and proper. The issue that is very live at this meeting is the issue of drivers from other authorities coming to work in York. There's nothing York can do about that. What the licensing authority have done outside of this meeting is to work closely with the other authorities in terms of enforcement and checks, etc., because it's an issue for the city. But the licence today isn't about that. This decision is about whether or not Uber Britannia Limited are considered by yourselves, based on the information you've heard, to be fit and proper to continue. Another aspect that you'll need to consider is whether or not, if you decide to renew the licence, whether it's for 1 year or 5 years, because the legislation says it will be 5 years if you're satisfied, and if you only want to give it for a shorter period, then you would have to give full reasons as to why you have concerns. So I don't know if that assists at all, but fit and proper is based in case law. So the information you have before you and whether you consider that in your own minds they're fit and proper and you trust them, basically.
Thank you.
Goodness. When we talk about fit and proper, and some people have asked about the fact that if Uber were not granted a licence, then out-of-town cars could still come into the city, and that is absolutely true, and nobody's denying that. I think the difference here is that if we don't feel it's a fit and proper company to be operating in York, then we shouldn't let the fact influence us that other out-of-town drivers can come into York. What we should be considering is that we will be, if we allow Uber another licence, then what we are doing is accepting that they are a fit and proper company and that we don't have any concerns about their operations, including the data breach. And I think that it's a bit of a red herring to say that if the licence isn't granted, out-of-town cars can still come into York. We know that. I think everybody who's been following this would know that. Oh, sorry, I thought that was on. So I'm very uncomfortable with the data breach in particular. Thankfully, I'm not one of their victims, but I'm quite sure there are some in York who are. I'm also not very comfortable with as Councillor Richard was saying, with this split contract thing, that it's not clear, and it won't be clear to the user. If it's not clear to us with all of this, it won't be clear to most users, this split contract and who is responsible for whom. I'm also not really confident that they always know what driver is in what car.
Thank you. I had the misfortune of being involved in a hearing. I've been involved in a couple of hearings, actually, in which I had the misfortune to deprive that taxi driver, a York taxi driver, of his ability to work. And the reason that I was able to do that is because what had occurred could only be verified by the operator. And the operator, in this particular case, I obviously can't go into the details, but the operator knew every single detail as to what had gone on. They knew precisely what was happening. They knew about where the person was picked up, where they were taken to, what had happened, and the entire detail behind that. And it was as a result of that information that I could put hand on heart and say, this is the correct decision, this taxi driver is not fit and proper. But I would not have been able to do that if that operator had not had that knowledge, because that knowledge was what made me able to make that decision. And I'm not sure if Mr. Fred Jones, the operator in this case, could supply me with that information. I suspect that he couldn't. It's a suspicion based on the fact that this is an international company and therefore it is that degree of control that is important for good standards. And as far as I'm concerned, what we're looking at is a very uneven playing field, an uneven playing field in which high standards have to be applied to taxi drivers in York. And when something goes wrong, those high standards can't be maintained, and that is the weakness, and that is why I believe that I have worries about their fit and proper nature. That would be my major concern.
Right. Councillor Taylor has indicated that he wants to join in the conversation, and so did Councillor Wells. So the corner of my eye has had your hand up before, Councillor Taylor. So.
Sorry, excuse me, Chair. Are we allowed to talk? Because there's things I would still like to say. I wasn't allowed to speak.
No, I'm afraid not.
What's going on?
You mean? No, yeah. He's asked if he can speak, and I've said no. So.
I've just conveyed to him that he can't come up forward and speak.
Okay.
Why can he not ask the chair in public rather than private conversation?
It doesn't matter.
This part.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. One of my concerns is to do with the way that the company knows that they've got 28,000 calls to do, and they've taken that business on knowing that they've then got to subcontract to somebody else. I don't think that that's good and proper business practice. I don't think it's a good and proper thing. Especially knowing that the taxi drivers that they've got on the books in York have to follow York's rules, and the subcontracted ones don't.
That's a good point. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I've always considered taxi drivers to be like the foremost ambassadors of our city, because they're often the first people that visitors to the city will meet. I expect taxi drivers to know, to have a knowledge of the city, to know where the best restaurants are, to know whether it might be a jazz band playing, which is the correct hotel, if it's Travelodge's Best Western or something, and which are the most direct routes to find all of those. I think all members and all citizens want and expect a high standard, high standards from our taxi drivers and from taxi companies. And I think it's difficult, if not impossible, for this council to maintain and to improve standards if these can be undermined and undercut by out-of-town drivers. Now, while I appreciate that Uber has introduced new technology into the business, and I've seen other companies in York now using technology which enables you to track your taxi online, I don't believe that Uber is a satisfactory operator to be working in this city. There is such a large number of complaints against them. There is a large number of complaints, and half of those complaints, over half of those complaints, relate to Uber drivers. I'm concerned that drivers may be unfamiliar with our roads and make mistakes which put passengers at risk. The drivers might not be bad drivers, or they might not be committing infringements on purpose, but may do so out of a lack of familiarity with our roads. I'm deeply concerned about stories of out-of-town drivers sleeping in their cars rather than drive a long distance home. And
Councillor Taylor, we're not here to talk about the out-of-town drivers. We're here to talk about the Uber operator applying for the licence here and whether or not he's fit and proper. We're not here to talk about those. I'm sorry, but we're not.
I'll come on to the points that you mentioned. I've come to distrust Uber due to the way it has behaved nationally in terms of its compliance with data protection, and internationally in terms of it turning a blind eye to sexual exploitation of its own staff. This city needs to have control of its taxi services, and it needs to have a level playing field for taxi companies. And maybe that means that national legislation ought to be tidied up. But I don't think that we can license a company which directs drivers to go around the houses, pumping up fares for customers, that tries to claim it has no liability for any claims, demands or losses, which claims to have a local office but never seems to staff it, and where the number of complaints against them is so high. And I think those are the grounds on which we can refuse this licence.
Okay. Does anybody else want to come into the debate or have anything else they want to say? You want to, Councillor Reid, join in.
Thanks, Chair. I came in tonight on the fence. I haven't made a having read the papers, I still was not sure whether or not they can be considered a fit and proper person. I've heard everything that's been said tonight, and I've heard some of the arguments around the table, and I'm not sure I'm any further forward, because I think one of the problems is the arguments have been about specific instances of things that are actually out of control, this council's control. Unfortunately, I think we would all like to have more control over the drivers that ply for trade in this city, wherever they come from. But the fact is that we don't, because it's not within our gift. I think some of the things that have been said by members have muddied the waters a bit. I wasn't quite sure what Councillor Wells meant by people subcontracting out. I wasn't under the impression that any of these people have been subcontracted out of the services. And I don't think that the business that Councillor Richardson raised is correct. We've heard, actually, that there are a number of Uber use a particular platform, but other companies use very similar platforms with very similar arrangements for passengers. And I don't think any of us get in and ask the driver whether or not they're self-employed, whether or not they're employed by somebody, what would happen if they had an accident. I don't think we do it with anybody. I don't think any operator would ask would inspect their taxis, their vehicles every day, which is what Councillor Richardson suggested Uber should be doing. I think there's been a lot of information, quite understandably, that we can't take into account, and I think that's the difficulty that I'm still having. In that I think some of the issues that have been raised are extremely serious, but refusing or allowing this licence actually won't affect some of the concerns that have been expressed in this room tonight. For me, I think the thing that is of great concern, and which we can't actually take into account now, is the data breach. And that might be a reason, if members wish to give a licence, to restrict it to a year on the grounds that we might wish to wait until we know what the result of the Information Commissioner is. I think that is the reason. I think I don't know, I mean, it might be that we could say, because of the data breach, we want to refuse the licence. Whether or not that would be strong enough, given that there's still an investigation, I don't know, but it might be a reason, if members wanted to go that way, to restrict it for a year. But I still would like to hear what other members say, because I'm still finding great difficulty in assimilating some of the very serious comments that have been made in the room tonight with whether or not that equates to the fit and proper bit of Uber being an operator. So I don't know if that's any help or not, but needed say. Councillor Mercer, you wanted to?
I did, yes, thank you. I was still waiting for the debate. Like Councillor Reid, I was still undecided, having read the papers. I'm still undecided
I think it's very unfair to lump all Uber drivers as sexual predators. I think that's like equating all lorry drivers to being like the Ripper or all doctors being like shipmen. Everybody is just trying to do a job. You've got good apples and bad apples in all trades. Uber is used all over the world by millions of people. In York, it's mainly the young people who use it. And I think maybe as well, it's probably a young thing. Maybe the older end of us don't understand it particularly. Out-of-town drivers wouldn't come if there wasn't any work. And we must remember that if the public want it, then who are we to deny it? I'm still on the horns of a dilemma, so I'll wait for further debate.
Is anybody else able to add to the debate? Councillor Hayes?
In terms of my direct experience, my daughter uses Uber extensively, and as far as I was concerned, she's always had a perfectly good service. However, I'm in a position tonight of having to decide on a licensing issue, and that licensing issue is about the fit and properness of this operator. And in my view, I think that there are concerns about in the worst case scenario, and I think that clearly the vast majority of Uber drivers will be fit and proper people, but we do not have to come to a legal level for a court of law. We have to have the sense that we're not sure whether this is a fit and proper person to operate this. And at that low level, I would be satisfied that I am not happy. And therefore, I would reject the licence. That would be my
opinion. Councillor Richardson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to come back on Councillor Reid, the point I was making is that if you're self-employed and you're working for a company, it's clear that you work for the company. You could be anything. You could be Fred Bloggs from Birmingham. At the end of the day, if you go and work for, say, A1 muck spreading, you are A1 muck spreading, and that's clear. We have a situation where we have vehicles that have a sign saying they are Uber. And by putting Uber on the vehicle, it clearly gives an opinion that that is Uber. Now, you may argue about, well, this thing about it's whether they're fit and proper. At the end of the day, do you expect a company to carry out checks? Yes. Do you expect companies to make sure that people working for them, because by putting that Uber sign up, to me, is you are working for Uber. Therefore, there is a connection between the two. And I would expect some sort of safety checks and some sort of backup system so that information is there to say the people we are employing are safe, etc., etc. But as Councillor Hayes has said, I'm not saying all of the drivers are bad. It's that small percentage that may not be carrying out the checks. They may have driven for a long way and they're coming in and they're carrying out, I don't know, maybe 2 hours or 10 hours. There's no clear information about how that is checked from the company. So it's then, is the company carrying out what some may call a moral responsibility? Some will say, health and safety wise, it's a responsibility. That's the question to me. And it's grey. And I'm sorry to say that it isn't this. The fact that they go around with a sticker on saying Uber, they're not saying, I am Fred Bloggs Taxi, and they get in and you go do it, which is clear. It's clearly Uber on the vehicle. And then there's the question about training, about what training we ask other taxi drivers to take. And then this is, well, they're self-employed, so therefore should we be insisting that they're doing training? There's too many arguments and too many grey areas about safety.
Yeah, well, we've said it before, we'll say it again. We're here to discuss. All right. Councillor Crisp.
I would consider a fit and proper person to hold a licence for a taxi company would be somebody who knows the drivers, and in local-based offices, they know their drivers, they know who's on what shift, on which day, They know them personally. They all know them personally because they work for a small company. I do not consider a company that has no contact, because it is an entity, not a person, that has no contact with their drivers whatsoever, except through the entity, which is the app, to be able to provide that comfort blanket, if you like, of being a fit and proper company, of knowing who their drivers are, who's there each day. And so I am very comfortable with rejecting this licence on that basis.
Okay, have we finished debating then? Have we all said everything we want to say on this topic? Yes? Okay. Members, on page 10 we have 3 options available to us, which would be option 1, to grant the renewal of the licence with the 5-year, or to grant the renewal of the licence with conditions for a lesser period, if it wants to be for a year, or refuse the application entirely. I need somebody to table something. Councillor Crisp. Microphone.
Sorry, I table that we move option 3 to refuse the application on the grounds that we don't consider it to be a fit and proper company.
We need specific grounds,
on the basis of the data breach. Initially, I'm sure that other members will come out with other reasons, but the data breach is of a great concern for people who live in this city. People can take over their identities with that. And the fact that the company we're granting the licence to is a company that failed to report it at the appropriate time. We don't know what else they're hiding, if they're hiding that.
Okay. So I've that moved. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Taylor, seconding, yeah? Okay. All those in favour then of option 3, refusing the application? Yeah, that's enough. Just the data breach, that's the only one. Yeah?
I suggested a bunch of grounds earlier on, but
Would you want
let
to
me repeat them, and
make them formal, then?
you can weed them out if you wish. I feel we should reject the licence as we have evidence that the company directs its drivers to take people a long way out of the way.
I don't think you've got any evidence of that.
I think we have a stack of evidence.
That's not evidence that the company directs them, that's evidence in respect of a specific journey that was taken, a different route from that which was originally put forward. There was no evidence that the company directs people on longer journeys.
Do you have any other ones, Councillor Taylor?
Yes, I think we have sufficient evidence of that, but I would also say the company tries to claim it has no liability for claims, demands or losses, and I think that's an unreasonable position for any company to take. It claims also to have a local office, but it never appears to be staffed. And again, I think that's a disingenuous position for any company to take. And we also have evidence of a great deal of complaints against this company. And all of that gives me a lack of confidence in this company.
I'll just go through it.
Yeah.
So in respect of the staffing, it isn't a requirement that the office is staffed. In respect of the liability, the specific response from the applicant was that the liability that was being referred to by members was in respect of the software application rather than the actual provision of the services as operator or driver. However, the complaints matter, the number of complaints and the consideration of complaints would be a material matter for members to consider.
So we have 2 conditions. We have 2 items for refusal, one being the data protection issue and one being the issue just outlined by complaints, the issue outlined by Neil. So we have 2.
I mean, could I add, and I think that this is another material issue, and that is the fact that we believe that this operator does not live up to the standards that have been set for other operators in the City of York.
No.
Yeah, specifically, in what way do they not meet expectations that other operators deliver?
Well, in that, it is quite clear that evidence. Forgive me, I'm sort of.
Can I just say, I have a huge amount of sympathy with members. The legislation, and I think all officers would reflect, and it's been reflected by members. The legislation itself is very difficult. But so officers, and I'm not trying to be particularly difficult in trying to assist you to your decision, but the grounds have to be specific as to why you do not consider this operator to be fit and proper in the context of the fact that you license other operators in the city as well without differential expectations of them.
Well, we'll stick with the. I'll
Okay, so just to recap, we have complaints and the data protection breach as the two grounds that we're going to refuse this application on, should you choose to vote that way. So, ready to take a vote? Yeah. Are we ready? Okay, so all those in favour of refusal of the application on the grounds that have been identified, please raise your hand. How many have we got? So did you go for against? We've got 12, so we've got... And again, I'm getting, don't worry. So I'm just making sure she's got the right number down. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Any abstentions? 2. So we have 7 in favour of refusing the application. We have 3 against refusing the application and 2 abstentions. So the licence stands refused. Yeah! Should I stand up and bow? That's it, yeah. If there's any matters, any urgent business... Any urgent business, but I have to ask one more time if there is any urgent business. If there isn't, the meeting is closed. Thank you.